thankful to have these three who been willing to come and talk to us about their various areas. Would you please introduce yourselves and tell us what your areas are of expertise?
Sure. Hi. Good evening. My name is Larry Holen. I'm the managing broker for Pioneer Real Estate Services. We're a locally owned property management firm here in Rockford, and happy to be here and hope to be able to answer some questions for you tonight.
And my name is Steve Vaughn. I'm a teacher at Rockford Lutheran High School, economics and government, 25-year resident of Rockford, Illinois, and try to be reasonably active in the community, and I'm really happy to be here as well.
I'm Sierra Kellen. I am also a Rockford native and a graduate of Rockford Lutheran High School, but I serve as the project manager for the Family Peace Center project through the City of Rockford Mayor's Office. Thanks.
Who's going first?
I guess I will. One of the reasons I'm here today is to sort of, I don't know how many people here are familiar with Transform Rockford, but it's an initiative that was started about 5-6 years ago. And I'm sort of here really wanting to give a snapshot of where Rockford stands today and the areas of improvement that the city has been trying to accomplish. And to help me out here, I'm going to have a little audio-visual program here. So, John, if you want to get that up. This is from the Rockford Register website from late 2013. Does anyone remember ever seeing something in the media here in our city that looked kind of like this? Rockford, again, makes a worst list. This is from November of 2013. It was as a result of a Forbes magazine portrayal and ranking of cities across the United States. And this was, in the time that I've lived here, probably the 6th or 7th time that we made a worst of list. And the interesting thing, when this happened, the mayor could have said, well, this is just wrong, this is nonsense, they just don't know about our city. But instead, the mayor said, well, let's take a look at what the criticisms are, and maybe we can do something about it. And from that concern grew Transform Rockford. John, if you could hit the slide. What you have here is something that Transform Rockford put together, showing areas that the city felt, the city fathers felt, and community leaders felt we needed to concentrate on. I'll get to this a little bit more. John, if you can hit the next. A little background. As I mentioned, in 2013, Forbes magazine says that we've got a problem. Our city fathers said that, rather than sit quietly and just pretend we don't have a problem, let's see if we can do something about it. And the mayor at the time called for a meeting of city fathers, and he opened it up to residents of our city at the Coronado Theater. They were expecting a fairly small crowd to sit together and try to determine what we could do to make our city a little bit better and quit getting this negative publicity in the news. And 1,300 people showed up. 1,300 people decided to get actively engaged to see what we could do to make our city a better place, and that was the genesis of the Transform Rockford movement. The goal is to make Rockford a top 25 community, okay, and a top 25 community by the year 2025. That's the goal. How do you do that? Well, you can encourage ethnic and racial and religious diversity. You can foster a crime-free culture in our city, and you want to deliver excellent education. You do these three things, you can make the city thrive. And to do these three things, though, it takes more than just concentrating on three things. You have to concentrate on a myriad of topics. And John, if we could hit again. So this is what we decided to do, or what the city fathers decided to do, were to concentrate on 12 specific areas. I can kind of read through all those, you can read through them as well. But we're looking at 12 areas, and if we can impact these 12 areas, then we'll be able to truly make Rockford a better place to live and make Rockford one of the 25 top cities in the country. So that gets us back to that wheel that I showed earlier. It's color-coded, you'll notice. And what we have here is a division of the needs that were identified in Rockford. Among those 12 areas we wish to focus on, there are 90 specific benchmarks that the city decided we need to try to use to measure our progress in making Rockford a better place to live. And the color codes represent the quartiles. We divided up 101 cities and split it into the list of 101 cities into 4. And these cities are on the top 25%, bottom 25%, and in the middle. The color codes, if it's color coded yellow, that means that it's a second quartile, green is top quartile, orange is third quartile, and red, of course, is the fourth. And as you can see up there, we have a whole lot of yellow, a fair amount of orange, a little bit of red, and not a whole lot of green. So we've got some areas of improvement. This is based on year-end 2017. I do not have a graphic past the year 2017. I think that if I did, it would be a little bit better. Nor do I have a graphic for before for when this started in 2013. If I did, I think you'd see more orange and more red. But I could go through 90 of these different measurements, different benchmarks, and that would put everyone to sleep. I'm not going to do that, but I did go through this and saw some things that I thought were worth highlighting about where our city stands. So, John, if you could hit the next. Current highlights of where we stand. These are looking at those 12 different benchmarks or focuses. Diversity, you can see, and I'm going to have to turn because I can't see real good the screen up there. But as you see in diversity, foreign-born is an interesting thing to look at. We have a few more foreign-born today than we did in 2013. We're still actually in the top quartile, meaning that we have in Rockford more foreign-born residents than many other cities, than 75% of the other cities that we can compare ourselves to. Why is that important? If you look at entrepreneurial startups, it's the foreign-born residents of the United States who drive entrepreneurship in our country. Entrepreneurship is what drives economic growth. If we are a city that can attract foreign residents to come here from other countries, that's a good sign that there's something about our city here that is attractive to entrepreneurs. They come here because there is opportunity, and they can find and start new businesses, and really that's what helps our economy grow. So that's a good thing, diversity in foreign-born residents. The next one there is economic foundation. Excuse me, if we can go back, yeah. Economic foundation is looking at the types of businesses that are here in Rockford that really provide good income for Rockford residents. And the two that we really want to focus on in our city are those who are employed in healthcare and those who are employed in manufacturing. In healthcare, we've actually gone down. We don't have as many people employed at the end of 2017 in healthcare as we did in 2013, and we dropped down to the fourth quartile. I'm hoping that might change with the new hospital out on the Far East Side. Perhaps that number will come up in the years to come. We do rank still very, very well in the percent of our residents who are employed in manufacturing. And manufacturing jobs are vital to our economy here in Rockford. That's where people make good money. And so that's a good sign if we can maintain that top quartile in manufacturing. Okay. Continue on with the economic foundation. Our poverty rate has gone down. We're in the second quartile on poverty. Some of you may have thought we might have been higher. We're not. We are in the second quartile, and if the trend continues, we might get out of that second quartile eventually, but we're not there yet. Median household income, we are also in the second quartile, and the trend again is positive, that we're gone from a $44,000 median family income to $53,000. Real GDP per capita is also on a positive trend, a good thing. Part of that is in 2013, we were still not fully out of the terrible economic downturn we had in 2008 to 2010. Rockford unemployment peaked in January of 2010. We were still suffering from that, so now we've largely come out of that economic downturn, and we can see that in the numbers. Education. This is kind of interesting as well. We're not doing that great on the percent of residents who have high school education, high school degree or higher. That number might look pretty good in the top 80%, high 80s, but it's only in the third quartile of similar cities in our country. We do a little bit better when we look at people with bachelor's degrees and people with either a graduate degree or professional degrees, and both of those were in the second quartile, so that we're the top half at least. Okay, employment and compensation. Take a look here. Yeah, we're in the top quartile in the number of jobs. Now, that might be confusing because we also have a lot of unemployment in our city. So how can we reconcile the number of jobs to a high unemployment rate? If you look there, we're in the bottom quartile for unemployment rate, top quartile for number of jobs. What that tells me is that we have jobs, but we don't have people who are trained to fill those jobs. We have a gap in skills. The small machine tool shops that you see on the south side and crosstown, but particularly on the south side, are begging for qualified workers, and they cannot find them. The jobs are there. We don't have enough qualified workers to take them, and consequently, we have a pretty high unemployment rate. Okay, looking at economic equity. Equity deals with, okay, we can look at the whole picture of Rockford and we might be doing good economically, but how are different groups within Rockford doing? And so if you look at equity by ethnicity, African Americans are lagging very far behind in Rockford compared to African Americans in other cities. Unfortunately, in Rockford, African American poverty rate puts us in the bottom quartile. That's an area where we really need to minister in this city and see what we can do to improve. Hispanic, on the other hand, we, from 2013 to 2017, moved from the second quartile to the top quartile in the amount of Hispanics who are living below the poverty line. White males were whites were in the second quartile. Under 18 years old, children, our child poverty rate has moved us from the third quartile, the bottom half of our country, to the second quartile. We're now in the top half, so we're on the right trend in childhood poverty. Growth. When we're talking about growth, we're talking about growth in population as well as the growth of our economy. And as you can see here, I don't think it comes as any surprise that Rockford is losing population, and we've gone into the bottom quartile in population growth. When we look at the median earnings of workers, we are in the second quartile. We've dropped there as well, so we do have an issue, obviously, with growth, and that's an area we're going to have to focus on. Okay, and neighborhoods. How healthy are our neighborhoods? And actually, we come out looking okay in some areas. In some areas, we could probably have room for improvement. If we look, the homeowner vacancy rate, I have a house 2 houses away from me that's been vacant for 6 or 7 years now. I'm surprised, actually, that we were once upon a time in the top quartile. We did not have a high homeowner vacancy rate, but now we do. We're in the bottom quartile. That means that we have a lot of homes that are owned that people haven't been able to sell and no one lives in them. And that's a way to quickly get urban blight. That's something that we have to make sure we can rectify. Median family income, second quartile, top half of the country. We're doing okay, and the trend is positive. We are making more now than we did in 2013. Again, that might partly be due to the fact that we pulled out of this economic recession that happened 10 years ago. And then the last one there, median value of owner-occupied homes. The value of our real estate has gone down since 2013, unfortunately. By the way, I keep saying 2017. We don't have more recent data. We probably will get more recent data next year, but right now we're having to deal with 2017 data. By the way, I need to interject here. I'm throwing out these numbers like crazy. I'm an economics teacher. It's what we do. Okay, safety. This is a big concern, of course, and it's probably no surprise to you that we aren't looking particularly good in certain areas of safety. Our property crime rate puts us in the bottom half of the country, and our violent crime rate sadly puts us in the bottom 25% of the country. We've got some work to do there. And you know, it's also connected. When you have unemployment of 10%, you're going to have high crime. It's a fact. And of course, there's a relationship to what's going on in Chicago. There's spillover from Chicago into Rockford. And but it's something that definitely is something we need to address. Okay, wellness. How healthy are we? You know, we've probably got some room for improvement there in some areas. In some areas, we're looking pretty good. Our obesity rate, we were in the top quartile in 2014. The years are a little different here. We have more recent data. We've fallen in obesity to the third quartile here in Rockford. I have no idea why, but it is a fact. On the other hand, our insurance rates. We are now in the top quartile of percent of residents of Rockford who have health insurance, which is a good thing. And I like this one, you know, do we have access to exercise opportunities, that last one. We really do, and we need to take advantage of it more. I think this is getting to the idea of how close are you to things like parks, trails, gyms, YMCA, whatever. How many health facilities do we have? How close do people live to them? How long does it take to get to them? That's one of the hidden gems of Rockford. When I moved here 25 years ago, I thought that Rockford was a good place to live from the standpoint of getting out and exercising, riding bike, cross-country skiing, whatever it is, and we've only gotten better in the 25 years that I've lived here. And that gets us back to that wheel again. You know, again, we've got a lot of yellow there. Yellow's better than orange, but we sure could use more green. It's the green that is the top quartile, and that's where we're trying to get. And I do think we're, in most areas, moving in the right direction.
Sounds like I'm up. Well, I appreciate what everything that was involved in that presentation, and I hope to kind of dovetail a little bit on that when it comes to where we've been and where we are now and where we're headed. And I'm also going to share some positive news. Unfortunately, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but if you can just follow with me. This is part of a presentation that was given to the City of Rockford, the Economic Development Council, and some folks at Transform Rockford about 2019 and some of the housing milestones that we've reached in recent years. So economic growth, that's the big driver. It is impossible to sell homes to people who don't have jobs. So for realtors that just want to focus, and in the real estate community, on selling real estate, we have to step back a little bit and be focused on economic development. And what type of economic development have we seen in recent years? Most recently, the Juvenile Bay Hospital. Largest construction project this community has ever seen. We're seeing new schools being built. We're seeing Woodward expanding. We're seeing Collins Aerospace expanding. These are all bringing in jobs. They're maintaining jobs that are here. But what do we need to attract people to those jobs? We need job training. That's something that Mr. Vaughn was just talking about, is the job training. We have jobs out there, but we don't have people to fill them. Our group was actively involved in Rock Valley College and NIU's development of an engineering program at Rock Valley. So students, local students, can get a 4-year engineering degree for the cost of about $40,000. That's $10,000 per year. They would spend the first 2 years at Rock Valley, and then the next 2 years they would be instructed by NIU engineering professors here at Rock Valley, and in addition would have an internship at a local manufacturer. That manufacturer could be Woodward, Collins, any of the small manufacturers in town. So we recognize as an industry, as a real estate industry, that economic development is key. So I'll just give you some brief statistics, but in Rockford right now, and these are 2019 numbers, so these are hot off the press, if you will. The 3-month rolling average for sales price for homes sold in Rockford, or really the Rockford region, and you have to, some of the numbers that Mr. Vaughn gave you were for Rockford. I'm giving you region numbers. So this is Rockford, Roscoe, Rockton, Winnebago, Boone County, Ogle County. We reached an all-time high for average sales price, $149,500. Huge number. Previous high was $146,000. in 2007. So from 2007 to 2019, 12 years, we finally are back to level, which is exciting. Mr. Vaughn gave a number or a date of November, I think, 2013, that said we were ranked one of the worst cities in Rockford. Anyone venture to guess what the average sales price was in that time period? In March of 2014, the average sales price was $88,140. So that tells you a lot of where we were in 2007 to where we were at the trough in 2014 and where we are now. So we've come all the way back to level from where we were in 2007. So some people might say, well, that's great news, or that's no news because we haven't gone anywhere. But we really did fall. Rockford was hit very, very hard, particularly the housing market, not only locally but regionally and nationally, but particularly here in Rockford, we were hit very, very hard. We were one of the highest, the cities with the highest foreclosure rate in the country. We were ranked worst city by a number of publications, so everything was just piling on Rockford. So for us to have dug ourselves out of this through economic development, through Transform Rockford, through the organization that I belong to, the Rockford Area Realtors, everyone is starting to pull together. We're all pulling together to try and bring the city back. So that represents a 66% recovery from the trough. Our year-to-date average home sale price right now, so year-to-date 2019 is $137,000. Last year at this time was $135,000. So it's not a huge increase, but again, we're seeing that trend line moving up. From our perspective, we look at how long does it take from the listing of a house to the sale of the house. Days on market, that's a big number for someone in the real estate world. Average days on market in December of 2017 was 62 days. We've essentially cut that in half, and we're now down to 34 days. So what does that tell you? That tells you that there is no inventory, that there are an abundance of buyers out there looking for properties, but there are not properties on the market. So when a home goes on for sale on the market, it's usually sold pretty quickly. Great for sellers, but it's also causing an inflation in the price of homes. This is all being done essentially with almost no new construction. So if you look around to those subdivisions that were being built in the mid and late 2000s, you're seeing one or two houses going up here and there. You're seeing some subdivisions starting to redevelop, but essentially we are nowhere near where we're in housing starts back in the mid and late 2000s. Distressed property. So Rockford was labeled the foreclosure capital of the country at one point. Again, another great headline to focus on Rockford. In January of 2013, so again, around that same time period that Mr. Vaughn referenced that we were labeled one of the worst cities, 45% of the homes that were sold in this community were distressed sales. Distressed sales could be anything from a foreclosure to a short sale, someone trying to sell for less than what they owe on the property. That was almost half of everything that was sold. So what does that do? Those properties are typically blighted. They're in poorer condition. That pulls the value of properties down. So that was 45%. Today we're at 3%. So that's a huge improvement from where we were just a few years ago. So we're really starting to see some momentum and some traction being built here in the housing market. So when you hear about a house being vacant for 6 years, and I can talk about foreclosures, that's really the crux of the work that my firm does. We do a lot of foreclosure work for Fannie Mae, for HUD, Freddie Mac, regional banks, large banks. And there is still a lot of inventory out there that's not on the market. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying here when I say that it's a smaller percentage of homes being sold. There's still a large amount of unsold, vacant, and blighted properties, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Affordability. So as people consider Rockford and they consider a job at any one of our local companies, one of the things they would consider is Rockford an affordable place to live? And Rockford still ranks in the top 15% of affordable communities in the country. So, for someone to be able to buy a house and pay $150,000 as an average, I have a daughter that lives in Houston, Texas. An average home that would be $150,000 here is probably closer to $250,000 to $275,000. And the housing market there is very robust, very active. Some areas of the east, it's even more expensive than that. So the average home price, again, $150,000. In Illinois, the average home price is $214,000, and the U.S. average home price is $278,000. So from someone relocating from a community where home prices are in the northern $200,000 price range, they can come here and they say, look at the house I can afford. Now, property taxes are another issue and something we can't control here at this meeting, but home affordability is pretty good. So taking all these factors into account, it's still a seller's market. So for sellers out there, for folks who are thinking about selling a house, who are trying to figure out if they can sell their house for any level of profit, now is a pretty decent time. Interest rates are low, the economy is strong, and again, that housing market is continuing to go up. So that gives you some year-to-date numbers. I can give you just quickly some monthly numbers, kind of where we are right now. Average sales price is up 3.1%. That's a jump of 4.8% above last year. But right now, the year-to-date sales are kind of flat. They're leveling off. There's just not enough inventory out there. So we need more inventory. And what you'll start to see, if rates are continuing to be favorable, you'll see builders start to put houses up. And they'll start to put houses up that people want to buy. They'll start to develop much nicer quality homes. I can spend a few minutes and talk about some of the blight issues in Rockford. If you read my bio, I talk a little bit about my involvement with the city of Rockford recently and a grant from IDA. IDA is the Illinois Housing Development Authority. They provided a grant to the city of Rockford to identify homes that were blighted in what were defined as hardest hit areas. Those are not so much defined by zip code, but more by census tract. So these are areas where owner occupancy is very low, the rental market is very high, so the percentage of people living in those areas are renters, not homeowners, and the percentage of homes that were boarded or just simply abandoned was very, very high. So we spent about 2 years working with the city's community development department, and we were able to identify about 31 homes that we could acquire. And those properties were all acquired and subsequently demolished. So these were homes that were beyond saving. Right now, I think that number is somewhere, the city will peg that number somewhere around 2,500 in the city of Rockford. So we were able to accomplish in a couple of years 30, and they have ongoing efforts, but there are nearly 2,500 vacant and blighted homes within the city of Rockford that are maybe beyond salvation. They need to be demolished. So the city looked at, how do we do that? How do we acquire these properties? And then once we have them, what do we do with them? The land bank was the answer. So Rockford is working with the city of Belvedere, which is a home rule community, and through their home rule powers are able to establish a land bank where the city can buy these properties, hold them, and then eventually sell them for redevelopment to individuals that may want to redevelop those properties. So I can talk a little bit about land bank if someone has some specific questions, but just know that the city, the community is working hard at identifying solutions to the blight problems that are present here in Rockford. That kind of concludes my brief presentation. So I think once Sierra is done with her presentation, we'd be open for questions.
Well, thanks for letting me come and speak. Mr. Gillingham asked me to speak a little bit about domestic violence and how our community is responding here in Rockford and the surrounding area. And so, as you might imagine, when I am on an airplane and tell people that I work around the issue of domestic violence, most people just pick up their magazine and keep reading. But I think even though the issue can make us a little uncomfortable, there's a lot of hope around what we're doing to address domestic violence. And I believe as people of faith, we're really good at hope. And I'm excited to tell you what's going on in our community around this issue, and I hope that you're excited about what our community is doing. And I think if there's any common thread up here, it's really that Rockford's doing some pretty incredible things, and we have some really amazing members of our community that are working hard to make our community the best and the safest and a really a thriving place to live and to raise your family and to work and to enjoy many outdoor activities and all of those great things that make Rockford a great place to be. So just really to paint the picture, 40% of our violent crime in our community is domestic violence related. So we hear a lot about Rockford having a lot of violent crime, and I'll tell you a lot of that is related to domestic violence. And so our community's been doing work around domestic violence for 40 years. We have some amazing organizations in the community that work directly with survivors, places like Remedies and Rockford Sexual Assault Counseling. There are many organizations that work with children affected by violence. But we haven't always coordinated those services well together. They've been doing their work in this respective area and all across the community, everyone doing their own work. But in the last few decades, our community started saying, how can we better coordinate what we're doing so that it makes the most impact? And so much of that work has been made possible through federal grants that have given us staff and an ability to really focus on looking into the issues, figuring out what's going on and what are the best practices to address them. And so much of that work, and if you read my bio, I spent a couple years working under the direction of Judge Rosemary Collins, who was the presiding judge over our domestic violence court and our family violence coordinating council. And so that family violence coordinating council really worked to start bringing all these partners together, direct service providers, law enforcement, judges, probation officers, even businesses in the private sector, to say, how can we work together to identify the issues and best address them? And as a result of that, we've had many more services come into the community. One really important one for families is the Children's Safe Harbor. And so Children's Safe Harbor does safe exchange and supervised visitation for families after separation as a result of violence. So when they still both need to see the child, have visitation or have exchange, they can do that in a safe way. And so as a result of all of these organizations coming to the table, we started looking really closely at what's going on in our community. And most recently in 2018, the mayor established a dedicated office on domestic violence and human trafficking prevention. And it's one of the only offices of its kind in the country. There are some that focus on one area, but usually not the other. And so we've had really the platform now to address some of these issues in a meaningful way and look carefully at them. And the mayor asked law enforcement to really look at what's going on, pull some stats, and show us what these cases are looking like. And so one of our lieutenants, Kurt Wisenhand, took a look at our violent juvenile offenders. So these aren't kids who are spray painting or staying out past curfew or driving over the speed limit, right? These are violent offenders. They're committing violent crimes against other people. And found that there were, in 2016 and 2017, 356 violent juvenile offenders identified by the city of Rockford alone. So that doesn't include the sheriff's department and surrounding communities. And so they took those names that were identified in these reports and cross-referenced them with previous reports to see where else are they showing up, what else is going on in their history that might be related to them committing violent crime. And we found that 75% of those kids were referenced as witnesses to their parents' domestic violence or direct victims of child abuse in those homes. And so that's all the evidence we need to know that if we are really going to get at this issue of domestic violence, we have got to hit Generation 2. We've got to address these children in the homes of members of our community that are being affected and watching this cycle and then growing up and repeating it, right? And Judge Collins always used to say, as a judge presiding over this court, she was standing at the bottom of a waterfall with a bucket and trying to stop this problem, but the bucket constantly overflows. And until we get on top of that waterfall and turn off the water source, we're never going to get ahead of this issue. And so we did a lot of listening in the community, and Jennifer Ketchapali is the manager of that Mayor's Office on Domestic Violence and Human Trafficking Prevention. So she talked to anyone and everyone that would sit down with her, judges, CEOs of nonprofits, frontline staff workers, faith leaders, survivors themselves, and asked, where are we missing the mark in our community? What aren't we doing right? Where are there still gaps? And what we heard resoundingly is it's too hard to navigate your system. Yes, you've got a great shelter, and yes, you've got the great counselors, but they're 20 minutes apart. And if I don't have transportation, and I've got 3 kids that have got to be picked up by 2:30 in the afternoon, and I've also still trying to work my 40-hour-a-week job because I used up all my vacation already, I can't manage going to all of your services in order to feel safe and supported enough to leave that abusive relationship or to cause some separation until there can be safety established. And so they were staying in these relationships because they felt like they had no way out. And even though we were helpful, we said, we can do this, but I can't do all these other things. You're gonna have to go to someone else for that, right? And we meant well, and we're trying really hard, but we weren't coordinating our services well. And so we really are working now, wrote a federal grant that I'm able to be funded under to establish a family justice center. And so the family justice center model really isn't starting any new organizations, but it's bringing together all of the services that already provide services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, trafficking, even elder abuse, and bringing them into one location. So now a survivor and their family only has to come to one place, and they can get an intake to understand their needs, and then we can help them understand, we want to be able to provide you these services. This is what we offer. How can we best help you and your family? And then they can come and just get everything they need right there. And even better than that, the service providers themselves get used to each other, right? When you have to call and leave a voicemail and maybe somebody doesn't call you back for 2 weeks because they're really busy too, you never get good information going back and forth between organizations. But when I'm just one door down and you just knock on my door and say, hey, what's going on with that case? We can really get things moving on behalf of survivors and help them be safe and feel supported through the court process, if they're going through the court process, through their counseling process, helping them build a resume. Maybe a survivor hasn't worked in 10 years because they've been raising their children, and all of a sudden they're going to be out on their own, and they don't have a resume, and they can't apply for jobs and feel like they have the skills to market themselves for a competitive position. And so we can help them do that. We have several banks that are offering financial classes. And so we're working really hard right now to develop that center. And our grant timeline is to be open by July 1st of 2020. So we're really getting close, and many of you have probably already participated in a listening session or maybe our strategic planning sessions. Maybe you've been to a fundraiser. We've been really all over the community. But I think what's really exciting, because people get concerned when they hear like, oh my gosh, our domestic violence problem is so big. Why is it so terrible in Rockford? And I like to flip the script because I don't think that it's so terrible in Rockford as if it's not so terrible in other communities. We're just paying attention. We started pulling back the layers, looking at the numbers, talking to people in the community and saying, no, we've got a problem that's probably been a problem in most communities for as long as we can remember. It's a human problem, right? We're just trying to address it in a meaningful way so that we can actually change something and maybe make our community safer and change the mindsets around how we treat one another, and provide meaningful long-term services. The other thing we hear from survivors a lot is, you were so helpful that night, but I need counseling a year later. Maybe 3 years later, something triggers me and it's like I'm right back in that situation again. Because if we understand trauma, we understand that it changes your brain chemistry. And so until we address that in a meaningful way, we can't stop supporting survivors. And the Family Peace Center and the efforts around the mayor's office really are positioned to help people as long as they need help, because that's what community is about. We're in the mud with you. We're standing alongside you. We're listening to you and actually changing maybe our policy, because maybe our policy wasn't inclusive, and you're able to give us that feedback, and then we can make an adjustment. And so I'm extremely humbled to be a part of this work. I think Rockford's doing some incredible things, and the reason you're hearing so much about it is because members of our community with a platform have said, enough is enough. We really want to make some change in this community, and we're not going to ignore this issue anymore. We're not going to say that's your family business that you handle behind closed doors and that's none of my business. We say, no, we're members of this community, and in this community, violence is not okay with us. And it stops here, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that you and your family can come and live in our community and feel safe and feel supported and feel like you can thrive here, and you don't have to move out of the state or move out of our city. We want members to come and to stay and to engage in really helping assist us in having a top 25 community. And so many of those numbers have a lot to do with the work that we're doing. And my contact information is at the bottom of my bio. Email is definitely the best way to reach me, but you can always leave me a voicemail, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm not always at my desk, but we're really excited about listening to members of our community and working with you to address this issue. And I firmly believe that we're going to get ahead of it. And we're really going to see some drastic changes. It's going to take a little while because we are looking at Generation 2. We're looking at those kids. But we're really at that fork in the road in our community, and I'm excited about the trajectory that we're on, and I hope you are too. So thanks.
I'd like to take the opportunity to ask a couple questions to start off. You guys are all done, right? Okay, good. Thanks for that. Very, very informative. Steve, you talked about the 90, what do you call it, areas that need to be worked on. And thank you for not listing all 90. Could you highlight maybe just a few of the most critical ones that need to be addressed?
Well, I think obviously crime is the number one. That's where Rockford has gotten bad publicity more than any other area. And crime, of course, is a result of going from, at the peak in 2010, Rockford hit an unemployment rate of about 16%. And that didn't include people who became discouraged and just gave up looking for jobs. And I think if we were actually to include those who, weren't working, that wished they were, but they just quit looking because they were discouraged, I think we were more like 25%. You're going to have high crime when you have that. So, we have to get good jobs in town and address the crime. That, I would say, are the biggest issues confronting Rockford, at least from my perspective.
Okay, thanks. This just shows my ignorance about what's been going on. The top 25 by 2025, is that the top 25 cities or the top 25% of the cities?
Transform Rockford looked at 101 cities that
So
it was felt that we could be reasonably compared to. So it's kind of one and the same. 25 cities equals 25%.
Okay. What do you think our chances are of making the goal?
I think that our chances are very good at improving where we are. Whether we'll be at 25, I don't know. I think that it's a realistic goal to strive for. Whether we can get there in 5 years, that's anyone's guess. I don't think it's impossible, but it's certainly be a big, big challenge.
Thank you. Who else would like to ask a question? Please.
This is for Sierra and your work with domestic violence. You talked about consolidating in the Justice Center all these different facets, in all these different communities to help with this issue. Is there a faith community presence? Are there pastors that help? Are there opportunities to get, to get involved or to?
Great question. So initially we established 5 working groups that are helping us establish the Family Peace Center, governance, service delivery, research and outcomes, community engagement. I'm forgetting one. But then in our conversations with members of the community, we had a really strong response from our faith leaders. People really wanting to be engaged, people feeling like they were hearing from their congregations that they wanted to be engaged, and they were asking leadership, how are we working on this issue? So we've actually established a faith leaders work group, and so that's a group that you're welcome to join. I can get you the information about that. And we're really working on 2 things. The first is starting to do training with leadership around education. What is domestic violence? What is sexual assault? How can we respond to members of our congregations that might be coming forward and disclosing that information. And when is it appropriate to say, we really need to bring in an expert for this or refer you to someone. And then our second initiative is actually to have chaplains in the center. So our goal is to put those that are interested in being chaplains through a training process, and that'll be similar to our City of Rockford Police and Fire chaplain process. And actually have faith leaders there all of the hours that we're open in sort of a rotating schedule, so that survivors who are people of faith who want to engage with a faith leader can do that while they're at the center. So really two primary ways that we're looking at. And honestly, the group has met, I think we've been meeting for 4 months now, and I see this being one of our strongest work groups. Everyone is so engaged. They're hearing from their congregations that this is something that's worth their time and effort. And so, even beyond those two initiatives, I see us really continuing to do a lot of work in the faith community. So feel free to send me an email, and I'll get you our next meeting date. Yeah, thanks.
So with the 350-ish, I'm going to say children or teenagers that kind of these repeat offenders of violent crime, you guys are tracking them, but what kind of programs do you have that are trying to keep them from repeating again?
Yeah, so one of the things that the mayor's office has established is what we're calling a JVERT team, so the Juvenile Enhanced Response Team. And so the effort behind that is to identify at-risk kids. Our 356 probably are going to be at the top of that list, and start doing some wraparound services for them. So we've written several federal grants to help support that, to actually hire staff to be dedicated to that process. We're also in conversations with schools, DCFS, several of our youth services in the community, so Children's Home and Aid, Lutheran Social Services, Youth Services Network, organizations like that do work with at-risk kids, to sort of build a multidisciplinary team around this issue. So I would say we're at the beginning of meaningful work around that. We're working on a program right now and writing for another federal grant that will establish basically the ability to identify kids through a screening process and then get those kids wraparound services immediately. What we have to work out, obviously, when you're dealing with minors, you have a lot of confidentiality considerations. We can't just go knocking on the school's door and say, give us all your troubled children and we're going to help them out. So we're working on the processes to do that, and making sure that everything is by the book so we can continue to do that work. But in the center itself, many of our service providers that provide services to children will have offices within the Family Peace Center. So when a family comes in, even if mom's primary, if those kids have been exposed, then they would have services on site as well.
I have a similar question in terms of crime as it relates to unemployment and how we can really support from those areas of growth. I was wondering if any of you happen to have any stats about Rockford's recent recidivism rates, and kind of similarly what resources there are or maybe needs there are for prison reentry in our community or jail reentry, and like what sort of opportunities or programs are there that maybe we as a church could be thinking about supporting those at-risk individuals and supporting them in reentry to hopefully target the recidivism rate and all the things that could flow from that.
What a great question. I do not have that data myself, although I'm sure it's available, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't have numbers for you. I think we can probably get them. There is a program through Region 1 Planning Center, and they have an advocate who works with folks coming out and really trying to resource them immediately. And I can get you her contact information. Because she's an incredible resource. Her name's Tratera Flowers. And so that program is federally funded. The community gets that money. But there's some really good work going on around recidivism. I just think it's never front page news, but it's really great work. So I'd love to have a conversation with you after and get you connected so we can get some of those questions answered. Yeah.
questions if we can use this microphone, because we're recording this. Who wants to ask the next question? Now nobody's going to put their hand up that they got to use the microphone.
In relation to that training that they have for people, I know that there's an awful lot of jobs out there. I've heard it time and time again saying, we have a lot of jobs out there, but we don't have trained people. I think it's because the manufacturers themselves only look for trained people, and they don't consider doing their own training. Come from AT&T, and in my day, we were trained on the job and eventually build ourselves up to the top. I wonder what the manufacturers are doing as far as training themselves. I know they're going to the schools for the training, but of course, when you talk about the cost of them training, you talked about a dollar figure. That's another thing too. They'll put a stopper on some of these people when trying to do that. So what are they? They should be looking at the possibility of doing some own training, bring them in little by little. Of course, then naturally have people that they would, how would you say, talk to them, entertain them, and see, okay, these people have a potential, and put them to work. Little by little, and build up those people so they get the training. So,
I can address that to some degree. As I mentioned earlier, our organization was involved in a program that was started by Woodward. And Woodward, I recognized that in order for them to develop their new facility, they would need engineers. And there just weren't enough engineers. And I don't have the exact statistic, but it goes something like this. The average engineer in this community is 55 years old. Well, guess what? A 55-year-old, what they're thinking about is retirement. They're not thinking about a new job or a new training. So another statistic is that a lot of kids that are educated in Rockford seek post-secondary education outside of Rockford and never come back. So how do we grab those kids, our kids who are already here? In other words, we don't want to bring people in from out of the community. How do we get our own kids involved? So Woodward really spearheaded that project, and if you go to Rock Valley College, they have a whole building named after themselves, or named after them. And but there are a number of manufacturers in Rockford that were involved in this program to bring NIU and Rock Valley College together in a program that could train engineers, and a lot of that is subsidized by those manufacturers. So not only do they subsidize the cost, because the cost is $10,000 a year for an engineering degree, you can't go anywhere and get an engineering degree at that price. And more importantly, they were giving these kids jobs. So after 2 years at Rock Valley, years 3 and 4 were still being educated here in Rockford, but by NIU professors, and they had internships at all these facilities. So if you talk to these kids, and I think the first graduating class was 2 years ago, and there weren't that many. There was a handful of kids. Now there's almost 300 kids in this program. So it is really starting to gain some traction, and these kids will all have jobs in Rockford working for Rockford employers. So that's all a result of these employers identifying that there's a problem. Where can we find these employees? Homegrown employees.
I think a key also, if I may add, is to attract the young people, you have to have the city offer something that makes them want to live here. And you know, young 25-year-olds don't want to be just, you know, driving down State Street to go to the strip mall. They want to be able to have a focal point where there's hopping activities going on. And I think the renewal of downtown is such a huge effort to make our city more attractive to younger people. And I'm telling you, I mean, you guys know, I think if you've been here a while, downtown is not at all like it was when I moved here 25 years ago. It is so much better, and that's hugely important to the health of our city.
Okay, who else has a question?
So Steve, you talked about the 90 or 95 areas that were being measured. And as a Christian community, what areas of that do you see potential for a Christian community being a support to, you know, move those things in the positive direction?
I think clearly from the standpoint of offering services that help the downtrodden in our society. You know, we've got 40% of the African American population living in poverty. What can the faith community, what can Christians do to impact that? Well, we're not going to just give them stuff, but we can certainly do something to make their lives better. We can certainly offer, you know, assistance to provide good meals for them through various types of soup kitchens and whatnot. But I mean, we've got to make ourselves address the needy within our own city, and who's better equipped to do that than the Christian community here in our city. We send missionaries to Africa, we can certainly do mission work within our own city.
Who else has a question? Okay, I'm going from one end to the other here.
So I've had this vision for a long time, and I know with the image classes we used to have here at Mount Olive, you know, you'd have people that needed to rebuild themselves, and they got training, and I wasn't involved, but anyway, I've had this vision of, I know people that are low income, don't know how to cook. They don't know what kind of foods to buy, how to stretch that dollar. So are there any programs that y'all are familiar with that might teach an adult in the family how to cook beans and rice, or, you know, things that will stretch instead of buying, you know, the prepared banquet meal?
Life skills class.
So I'm just curious if there are any programs that you're familiar with that way.
In the housing community, there's an organization called Home Start, and they don't teach them how to cook, but they do run through budgeting classes. They teach them the importance of financial well-being. That unfortunately, a lot of folks, particularly renters, are living paycheck to paycheck, and how do you go from that to home ownership? And Home Start offers some good programs. That's a local program. There's a grant associated with that benefits the individual who goes through the class. So there's some grant monies available for down payment assistance, closing cost assistance, reduced mortgage insurance. You know, there's a number of things, but the importance there is just the financial well-being. I think that's the key.
I'll say too, in Milwaukee at their Family Peace Center, they do cooking classes as a part of their offering at the center. And so many of the families that are staying at shelter, we're not sure if we're going to do a shelter at our center at this time, but they offer cooking classes. And I'm not sure if it's an organization, but I feel like it's a group of volunteers that come in and they'll teach a meal. So like how to put together a whole meal start to finish. And it would be something simple that is cost effective, but not just, you know, the main course, but what side you could put with it, and really teaching people skills of how to build that plate. And that, to me, is one of those things that a group of dedicated volunteers could easily implement. And maybe that's us meeting a need in some way. I think, you know, food insecurity and access to grocery stores and things like that. I mean, that's all a piece of that bigger picture, but you're right. I mean, even if you have a grocery store down the street, but you've never been taught how to make a meal, that can definitely impact your ability to feed your family effectively. So in my mind, I mean, that may be a way that the church can respond, a small group putting something like that together.
You know, one of the benchmarks I did not address was something called resilience, and resilience deals with the difficulty one has in getting to the basic life necessities that exist. And, you know, unfortunately, we have these grocery store deserts that have happened in Rockford in the last several years, where grocery stores have closed, and you have large areas of certain parts of town that they don't have a grocery store within a mile and a half, you know, you know, that's something along, that's related to what Rita was just saying. We need to make sure that we all have access to those basic life necessities, and right now there are areas where we don't have that.
Who's next?
So my question is kind of two-sided, I guess. Speaking as a teacher, and I know there's other teachers and school professionals in the room, what are some of either the biggest needs that you see schools having in Rockford, or kind of on the other side of that, what are some of the bigger needs you see in Rockford, particularly with the children, that schools could help address?
As a teacher, I think the big challenge, of course, is the funding. And you know, I know where I teach, realistically, I don't think we can have like very much of a trade school-oriented, you know, curriculum, but I think certainly certain schools could. I think that you know, I would love to see schools offering shop, you know, basic metalworking and woodworking shop. I think those would teach skills that are needed. Now, we do things through STEM classes and that are also useful, but not everyone's suited for college, and I would love to see the schools do things that direct kids to trades, to skilled trades, and we don't have enough of that, I don't think, in any of our schools, private or public.
Yeah, I'll say too, as we've started to look at the juvenile violent crime and trauma in our community, we know that schools are how we get at kids. I mean, you all hold the key when it comes to identification. You know, certainly there's opportunity for training so that there can be some prevention work. Even things as simple as curriculum for students around healthy relationships. We hear from a lot of survivors that we would say, are you in a domestic violence relationship? And they would say, what's domestic violence? Because they didn't understand that violence in their relationship wasn't a loving behavior, because that's just all they ever knew. And so actually giving kids some information around this is what a loving relationship looks like, and this is what an unhealthy relationship looks like, helps kids disclose, okay, this is something I'm in too deep and I need some help. You know, my lens is a little, I suppose, more narrow around, you know, some of these victimizations, but in our mind, it's starting with kids as young as grade school. Certainly in our public schools, from the law enforcement perspective, if we haven't started engaging kids before the age of 11, it's really, really hard, because they have so many factors working against them by that point, and they've watched enough by that point that to turn that trajectory is very difficult. And so even in grade school, I think there are opportunities that schools have, that teachers have, to help us identify the need and get kids services, and to help educate our students around what healthy relationships look like. I think that's a hard conversation to do well. We ask our teachers to do so much already, and I'm sensitive to that. I have a lot of teachers in my life, and I know you all have a pretty heavy burden already. But I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for us to brainstorm and to think through how schools can play a role in that conversation.
Right back here.
Piggybacking off on what she talked about, I lived in Milwaukee before, and I was a part of a mentoring program with UWM. I actually taught life skills and things like that. Is there any mentoring programs here in Rockford for high school, middle school students?
There are, and I'm familiar with an African American, specifically mentoring program, and I am mentally blocked right now. I can't think, but there's a man by the name of Joshua Patterson. I don't know, if anyone knows him, but he is actively involved in a mentoring program, and I could get more information on that program. And I'm sure there's more, but I'm familiar with this one specific one.
Yes, I know for sure there's 100 Strong, and that may be K-FACT. K-FACT is for girls in particular. But there are many kind of grassroots mentoring programs happening, some actually through law enforcement. There's several camps. Some of them are faith-based in our community. I just heard of one, and the name's escaping me, but I'm not sure how they identify kids, but then kids can go to camp for free throughout the summer, and it's a Lutheran organization that does the camp. But there are some, but most of them are not grassroots, nonprofit, volunteer-led organizations. So I can do some digging too and maybe send that information out.
Are you wanted?
I work for Habitat for Humanity about 16 years now, and the last 4 years, Guilford High School has helped us. They built a house. I think they're either on the third or fourth one. And I helped them last year. They were a little behind on the siding, so I went over and helped them. And out of the group of 10 or 12, 4 of them had jobs because of working with Guilford High School coming this summer. And they weren't all putting siding on. They were, some were interested in plumbing and had worked with the plumbers on the house. Some worked with electricians. And why can't we get more schools involved like that? I know Harlem used to do it, and I don't know why they stopped. But
is there any programs in schools, or kind of going off of the previous 2 questions before the last, that are maybe utilizing people to educate kids about drugs and crime and the way that it kind of filters into your life, you know, through your friends and things like that? I just didn't know if there was programs like that available where people could maybe come and talk about previous experience or things like that.
I'm not involved in the counseling area in that way. I don't know. I've got to think there probably are, but I don't know of the specific.
I wasn't sure. That's what it is.
I will say we're always happy to come talk to schools if you want to help us get a foot in the door.
Another question? Anyone?
I don't know that I need a mic, but I don't know that it's a question, it's just a positive note. I'm involved in a family business. We started with 2 people back in 1960. Now we have over 400. And so speaking to one of the members here in front from our church, we do have a very strong apprenticeship program here in Rockford. I think you tagged off on that with Woodward starting, and there's a lot of manufacturing companies that are following that. We've had an apprenticeship program for many, many, many years, and taking someone like Shamika Williams, who's the executive director for the KFACT, which is a mentoring program for the girls that Sierra was talking about. Her son just was at the university, so this isn't for me. There are kids out there looking for a really strong apprenticeship program and learning these skills. And I know there's a huge lack right now just in our company finding skilled workers, like CNC operators. And they know they can get jobs. There just isn't enough. There's many jobs out there, but not enough people. So I think we're doing a great job in Rockford. All of the manufacturers, there's an organization called the Rockford Tooling and Machining Association too that's promoting all of this and keeping manufacturing going and trying to tap into the young people and giving them the skills that they need to make a difference. And I wish we could find more of that in the high school level, and I don't know if you know more of that. I know Jefferson for a long time, we would tap into the students and bring them out already in high school. We wait until they're 19 years old, and it's almost too late. In Europe, they start at age 14, and they're already making a trek in a direction of a skilled, career rather than maybe going through the university route. So I don't know if that's changing education or anything. If anybody knows anything on that, we're looking for opportunities to engage high school students, not waiting until they're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Okay, any other questions? Here we go.
I thought of another question pertaining to the stats you had about our growing
international population in Rockford. Do you know if that growth is coming from, is that more an economic draw, or is that, do we have much of a refugee presence here? I know that Chicago is like a main entry point as well as a kind of a placement center for internationals and refugees. So I didn't know if any of you knew of needs in the, in the vein of fostering and supporting economic diversity and community in Rockford, if we have a refugee presence and what the needs for them would be and where we could plug in.
Well, I know that it's a combination of multi things. We have a large refugee population in Rockford, but we've also got a growing population of very well-educated immigrants as well. So I mean, it runs the full gamut for sure. And it's not all from where, it's not all from Latin America by any means either. It's from all over the world. And you can't stereotype what an immigrant is in Rockford, but what I can say is that immigration is good for Rockford. It's good for our economy. And it's one area that we could really shine in.
Larry, Steve, Sierra, this has been very good. Thank you so much for coming. Would you show your thanks, please? We really do appreciate what you've done tonight. Thank you so much. Just a quick announcement for those of you who are on Mount Olive's elders and council. We meet downstairs in the meeting room where we usually do. Thanks so much for coming tonight.